Why do some family businesses last the length of time and others don't? Typically, what happens is as you evolve through time and go from Gen 2 to Gen 3 to Gen 4, more and more folks typically get some level of ownership. And the more people that get involved, well, the more complicated things can be. Because, well, different people want different things. When we got into a conversation of governance, and I've been waiting to do an episode specifically on this topic, I knew right away who I wanted to have on, and that's David Karofsky. David is someone who's been in the family business space for 20, 30 years, quite some time. In fact, he came from a family business, and then he worked in a family business with his father, advising family business owners. And then now he's with the Family Business Consulting Group and one of the principals there. David is a friend, he's a colleague, and at times he's a mentor to me. He's someone I'll reach out to when I'm navigating complex casework, where he's got the experience set to help me think through where I can best advise the families I'm working with. In this particular episode, David and I, we talk about what is governance, why does it matter, when do you want a board, if you want a board, how to go about thinking about that process. We also talk about things like family councils and what they are and why they exist. We also talk about, what is conflict in family, or why does conflict exist in family? And actually, why is it healthy to have conflict? And what is the space that a family business advisor plays with a family business, and when and where you might want to leverage one? For anyone that has a family business, regardless if you're just getting started or you've been around for 150 years, I think there's something here in this episode for you. You'll walk away with a few ideas and hopefully some new thought processes in regards to how you navigate your family business and your future. Let's get to the episode. David, thanks for being here this morning.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you, and this should be fun today.
Yeah, right on. Can we begin a little with your? I know you started in business with your dad in the family business advising space. It's always good to give a little bit of context to folks in regards to the trajectory of someone's career path. Can you give us a little background on that and what brought you into family business advising?
Sure. So I grew up in a family business. My father was third generation in our family's wholesale wallpaper distribution business that my great-grandmother started when she came over to the country in the early 1900s. And that business evolved. My great-grandmother started it. My grandfather took it over, and then my dad succeeded him, and he sold it back in 1988. And I was still, a junior or senior in high school. And then he started getting into family business consulting. He went back to school and started Northeastern University in Boston, their center for family business. And so he had been doing it for a while. I went off and had a career doing a lot of different things on my own. And then after I had been involved in the sale of a startup back in about 2008, 2009, I joined him. We were talking, and he felt like he was getting a little bit older and couldn't relate to the younger generation as well. And so I said, yeah, let's do something. So he and I worked for about a decade together as a father-son team consulting to family businesses. And we were one of the few, if not the only father-son team doing this in the industry. And so it was a very, very cool experience.
Yeah.
We wrote a book together in 2016 around case studies of clients that we worked with. And then he decided to retire in 2018. Around that same time, in about 2017, the Family Business Consulting Group approached me and asked if I was interested in joining them. And the timing was it was perfect. And so I decided to join them. And I've now been with them since 2017 and became a partner in 2020. And it's been a great ride.
Yeah, really cool. I can imagine advising family businesses and being a family business yourself had to create some interesting credibility and differentiation in the marketplace.
Well, it was. In many ways, we kind of practiced what we preached. My dad and I didn't agree on everything, and we didn't even agree on on stuff necessarily in front of the client. And it wasn't about, it had to be a disagreement. We would show right in front of the client, how do you navigate a conversation when people don't always see eye to eye? And that's inevitable. I've always told clients, we're not trying to avoid conflict. You're trying to manage conflict, because conflict's inevitable, friction's inevitable. It's one of the things that makes the world move forward. The key is, how do you have those conversations and be able to disagree without being disagreeable? And my father and I were able to demonstrate that live in front of clients, and it was a pretty cool dynamic.
Is that probably typically why I would say probably strong advisors, when working with families, will start with communication as one of the first things that they're going to work on? Does that resonate with you?
It resonates very much with me. In the book that we wrote, communication was kind of the foundation throughout the entire book. It does start in the vast majority of the engagements that I start with communication. To me, it's the foundation of how you address everything from succession planning to ownership transition to building governance structures. If you can't communicate well, how do you move forward? Where do you go from there?
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, it's interesting. You and I see it all the time. I mean, I started with a family just recently, and and from the outside, it's succession related, but from the outside, it seems very logical. You talk to each party, get perspective, you can see how the pieces could go together, how it could work, but yet they can't seem to get there on their own. Why do you think that is?
We were never taught how to communicate. You're taught your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s, and you're taught everything through history and your foreign languages and whatever you study through, certainly through high school. If you choose to focus on some communication stuff in college, that may be different, but we're never really taught. And if our parents don't have those skills, where do we have an opportunity to learn them? And so, one of the things that's really evolved over the last 20 years is this concept around emotional intelligence, EQ, right? Mm-hmm. It's not something that when you and I were growing up, we was only IQ. We never, ever that I recall ever talked about EQ. I'm sure it was out there, but it wasn't really talked about. And today it really is, probably even more so than IQ in many ways. And that's emotional intelligence, which is, among many of the concepts around emotional intelligence, is your ability to communicate. And so today, I think there's more of a focus on how do we communicate with each other? How do we listen and be able to hear and validate what other people are saying without necessarily agreeing? One of the things my father always told me, and one of the things that we use when we were practicing together, and one of the things I still say today, is God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we're supposed to use them proportionately. And people don't. People are more interested in what they have to say many times than what the other person really has to say, or is trying to see it from their perspective. And until we learn those skills, which are not inherently taught in school, let alone life, that's where the communication can break down. And it sounds simple, yet it's incredibly difficult.
What if we think we already know what someone has to say and we don't want to hear it again? Because we've heard it so many times, Dave. Over and over. The story's the same. You know what? You always go here, Mark. Every single time. What do you say? What do you say to those hooks?
What I say to that is, the assumption is the mother of all evil, and don't assume you always know, even though you may have known your brother for his entire life or your entire life. He or she, your brother or sister or mom or dad or whatever, they may think a little bit differently on this one, and give them the chance, even though you may already know what they're going to say. If they don't feel like they're being heard, they're never going to hear you. And even though you may know, let them get it out. Let them be heard. It is critical. Absolutely. It is the number one thing I deal with, is just the inability for people to communicate effectively with each other and then make change based on new information that they may be getting.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about, or I mean a bit more than a little, on governance. And when I first started understanding governance and studying it with FFI, part of my, and talking to families who didn't have a training or understanding of what that is, I saw at times a bit of resistance from the families themselves
Yeah.
in order of like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you going to turn me into the government? Are you going to establish, the government's messed up as it is. I mean, the word in itself, I can see at times folks getting resistant. Can you level set how you define governance in family business? And I'd like to talk about why it's important.
So in a family business, there's really kind of two types of governance. There's family governance and then there's business governance. So I think today we're going to talk more about the business governance.
We'll talk a little about both, yes, but let's talk about both. Yes.
To me, governance, the word that I use for governance is oversight. It's not coming in and controlling the situation. It's creating oversight of the business. It's creating accountability in the business. It's ensuring that management is doing what they need to be doing to properly run the company, get a good return, and ideally protect the shareholder group. That's really what it's there for. The biggest, as you kind of allude to, the biggest concern is I don't want people coming in here and telling me what to do. And I don't want to lose control, right? Losing control is probably the number one fear that family owners have when they start thinking about a board of directors. And I always say to them, you don't really lose control because you, the owners, vote the board. You get to pick who sits on the board. And if you're not happy with how the board's performing, you can fire the board or you can fire certain members of the board. And so you do have the ultimate say. And as shareholders, you won't lose that. That being said, it can be helpful to have a group of individuals who are overseeing how management's performing, be able to be a resource to management, and particularly the CEO, for whatever needs he or she may have, be that sounding board, be a little bit more strategic versus just tactical, working day to day in the business, and bring experience that members of management may not have or ownership may not have. That's some of the benefits. And there's a whole evolution of boards. It can start from a family board to a board of directors to maybe an evolution where you have a board of directors over time. We tend to see that evolution happen in kind of a G2 to G3 and G3 to G4. G1, generation one, generally, they're the owner, they're the founder, they're going to be the decision maker, and that's fine. And we don't want to take that away from them at all. When we start to see the evolution of ownership, and it tends to get more complex when you move down from a G1 to a G2, and you may have 2 or 3 owners, to a G3 may have 4, 5, 6, 7 owners because it may be their kids. Things can get more complex. And the chances are that not all the owners are going to be working in the business. And so now you've got different kinds of owners with maybe different sets of expectations. The governance, the board of directors, ideally sits in between ownership and management, kind of right there in the middle, and they can navigate the dynamic between ownership and management. And that can be really helpful.
What's the I have a couple questions in mind. One is that you kind of answered it, is that I've often seen folks that are going from G3 to G4 in a family, and it's almost like they start adopting this paradigm, especially when they don't have established the governance. And they're like, well, I can see why many families don't go from 3 to 4 because of all these variability that exists now that wasn't there before. Is there a sense of accuracy to that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's tons of statistics, whether you believe them or not, around, that kind of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, or family businesses, only a third get through, a second generation to a third, and only 10% make it to a fourth. There's a lot of data out there, and it can be accepted or it can be refuted. The fact of the matter is that, as you say, family businesses absolutely get more complex as you go down the generations. And what contributes to the complexity, unless you're going to create some real strict rules as to how ownership is transitioned, is more people. When you get more people, things get more complex. In a business, if you're a sole person, you're a sole proprietor, and it's your business, it's pretty simple. You make the decisions. You say left, you say right, you say you want to take on a client or you don't. You make all the decisions in your entire career. But now if you've got 2 partners or 4 partners or 10 partners, everybody's got an opinion. And this is, again, where communication comes in. When that complexity increases when you have more people in the room, and when you've got a divergent set of expectations and desires across ownership, because some owners may be working in the business and some owners may not be working in the business, that's where complexity happens. Owners that are not working in the business may choose to say, hey, I want a dividend. I want what's the value of ownership? I want some money out of this thing and I want a dividend. Owners that are working in the business may say, okay, but maybe I want a little bit of a less of a dividend because I want to pump money back into the business to double down and reinvest in infrastructure or CapEx or people or whatever. And so you can get divergent set of opinions and expectations as to what this business is supposed to be doing and who or whom it's supposed to be serving. That's where governance can be very, very helpful, because they can kind of help create a level space to be able to have really logical conversations and minimize the emotion that sometimes comes in a family business.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen situations where, at a point in time, a generation who's exiting decides to, well, I'm going to allocate my stock, my shares equally to a group of people.
Yep.
And then some of that group of people ends up being in the business, some group of people not even in the business at all.
Yep.
And then it feels like, wow, this isn't very fair. I'm the one in the business. I'm the one doing X, Y, and Z, but yet they just get to collect checks. Why?
Yeah.
And it creates this animosity.
Absolutely. Yeah. This concept of fair and equal in family is a very interesting concept. In family, fair sometimes is equal. If you're at dinner and you got 3 kids and there's 3 cookies for dessert, each kid's probably going to get one. You're not going to give 2 to 1 so that one can't have one. It's not fair and it's not equal. In business, fair and equal can play, but often not the case. In the example you're giving, which is a great one, and I've got multiple clients in that situation. One that I'm thinking about, there's 4 kids, very successful business. Dad's going to pass ownership equally. 2 of the sons work in the business, and 1 son and 1 daughter don't work in the business. And so the conversation is, what's fair and what's equal? From an ownership standpoint, they will each own 25% of the company. The 2 that are working in the business, but they're also being compensated for their job to be doing what they're doing. And you can structure stuff within the organization to maybe give them a little bit more. It could be incentives around performance or profit sharing or whatnot that the non-operating owners may not be party to. But yes, it can create conflict, animosity, resentment. It also depends on kind of what your attitude is towards family and ownership. And every family is different, and there's no right or wrong answer. The right answer is to talk about it and make sure that you can do your best to get the family aligned on what those expectations of ownership look like, and how you try and create a fair situation, which may not necessarily be equal.
Yeah.
You got to talk about it.
That's a good point, especially when, you've had and it's so easy to, I can get it. I mean, I only have 1 kid, but I try to put yourself in that situation, right? And you've got more than 1, and it's like you're not going to ever put one in favor over another one in regards to anything you're going to do, right? You're going to take one on vacation and never offer the other one to go on vacation. Like, it's just, right? It's just, that doesn't, but then it's so hard not to bring that into the fold when it involves the business. Because, it's like the last thing most families want is to rip the family apart or tear the family apart because of navigating consequences of a business.
Yeah. And the fact is that people are going to have differing opinions, and that's okay. The key is, in any good negotiation, and many people have said this over the years, that the best result of a good negotiation is that both people walk away saying, I can live with that. If any one person in negotiate, if you and I are going to negotiate and I walk away going, yes, I got everything I want, chances are you're not going to feel so psyched about the result. And the same thing about if you got everything you want, chances are I may not. But if each of us walks away going, you know what, I can live with that. That's fair. I didn't get everything I wanted, but it's fair. We're both going to walk away okay. And in family, that's really critical. If the family wants to stay together, and I kind of operate under the premise that most families, it's family first. Not always, not every time, and that's okay. There's no judgment. Every family is entitled to do what they want. But if they want the family to stay together, then each family member has got to be willing to make some accommodations.
Yeah. How do you help families see beyond where they're at today for the inevitability for a generation or two beyond? Sometimes I get into conversations and there perhaps might be looking at, well, maybe it's time for us to sell because we're not sure how to navigate, and maybe perhaps they might be looking at it like, well, we've got to have XYZ amount of family members in the business for this to continue because that's what we've always known for 125 years.
Yeah.
Or I don't see who could be the next CEO, and you and I know that we'll get into there's ways to navigate that that can work, and I think oftentimes folks if they realize that what's been available to them could be available for one or two generations later, and if you do sell the business, which is fine, but you might lose some of the possibility of what could happen down the road. How do you get folks into that conversation of, and you know, we never tell people what to do or, move them one way or another, but I think it's also good. Part of our job though is to open them up to what possibility is, because some people are very, very narrow focused because all their experience is just their own.
Well, you said it really well right there at the end. Is our job is not to, I'm a process consultant, much like you are. And our job is not to come in and advise and be the expert in the room per se as to what they should do or not do. Our job is to ask questions, listen, help each other, help the clients be able to hear each other, and ultimately get to a point where they get to resolution. And transition, right now we're in a period of massive transition, just sociologically within where we are culture, where we are today. And so there's this massive transition of wealth. There's this massive transition of these operating businesses. The baby boomers are aging out, and all this stuff is happening right now. And so transition is a huge conversation that's going on. And what transition looks like can look so many different ways today than ever before. There's a lot of research out there around family businesses that the two most important factors in contributing to a sustainable family business is one, strategic planning, and two, formal governance, a board. And those two go hand in hand in many ways, because a board may be able to come out and do an offsite, for example, and do some real strategic planning with the senior management team and be able to come out with a 3 to 5 year vision. I'm not a fan of 10-year visions. I just think too much can happen in 10 years. 3 to 5 is kind of where I tend to spend time when I'm doing some strategic stuff. And it's that creating that roadmap for transition is critical, because transition doesn't happen in 6 months. If you're going to transition leadership, it's a multi-year process to really do it well. And who takes over the business? It depends. It doesn't have to be a family member. It might be, but it might not be. And this is where boards actually can be super helpful, because if it's not a family member, even if it is a family member, they can be that kind of that constant in change when you're going through a transition. I'm working with a family business right now, 7th generation family business, obviously been around for a very, very long time. Has had for the first time a non-family CEO for the last 10 or so years, maybe a little less. And they're now transitioning to their next non-family CEO. And the board has been instrumental in creating consistency for that management team and allowing that next CEO to be very, very successful. And it's that stabilizing factor. The board in this case is the stabilizing factor for the family, because the family knows that, yes, they're going to go through change and management's going to change and things are going to be a little bit different. But the one constant throughout this is the board, as well as ownership. And so they are there to be that support mechanism. So it doesn't have to be a family member. And ideally, it might be if they've got the right chops, so to speak, to run the business, and they understand what is needed there. I think today family businesses have more options than they ever had in terms of how do you transition, including selling. I don't advocate for selling. I think that if it can be right in certain circumstances. A colleague and I, Josh Knack and I, just wrote an article for Family Business Consulting Group around when is it time to sell, and thinking about that. And we both had a couple of different case studies and examples. There are times where selling makes sense. My father sold. He was third generation. He sold our family business. Why? Because it made sense. The industry was changing. People weren't using wallpaper as much in the late 80s like they were in the 70s and 80s. And it was time to change. And he capitalized on that opportunity, and he did it. And I'm sure there was a piece of him that was torn to say, wow, this business won't be around for me or my sister or whatever. But that at the time, it was absolutely the right decision. And he made it while it was still difficult. And so selling can be an option, and one that I would encourage families just to talk about. So at least you gauge kind of how people feel about it. But there's lots of options around transition today.
I'd like to walk through a little bit of a roadmap in regards to the thought process around building out a board and whatnot. Yeah. And I'll put a little disclaimer in here that I really think it's mindful to work with someone like yourself to navigate this, because some of what we'll talk about is there can be a lot of variability in that regard, and none of this stuff is very black and white, right?
It's definitely not.
A bit of a science and a lot of an art too.
A lot of gray.
Yeah. In that regard, let's say someone has a family business. Let's just say they've been around for, I'm going to pick a number, 100 years, a while, and perhaps 3 generations or so thereabouts. And they realize, there's some drive for several folks in the family to keep the family business going. Let's just say that they're in an industry that can be around for a while. There could be some innovation. There's some potential. What's the first step in the process of like, okay, well, I think this idea of having a level of a board, some other people who are involved, who are working with us, not only just advising, but recommending, working on strategy, helping us. It's kind of cool. It's just like basically building a mastermind of high level thinkers that you have access to. Yep. It creates this a whole massive pool of resources that you wouldn't have had available otherwise if you hadn't done it.
Correct.
But do you recommend building out a family council first? And let's talk about what that is in regard, in that regard, or is that later? So first, let's talk about what a family council is, and then how does that fit into this piece?
Well, I think a family council is, and that's the form of governance for a family. Yeah. I tend to separate those two conversations. It's if a third generation family, and let's assume that mom and dad, and they each had, they had 3 kids, and each of them had 3 kids, just to keep the math simple, right? So you've got 9 kids in the third generation, you got 3, so you got 12. Mom and dad is so you got 13, 14 people around. Okay. And the business has created significant wealth for the family, for example. It may be time to start thinking about a family council, which is a way it's kind of the unifying mechanism for a family to stay together, create some commonality around education. Could be education on the business, could be education around philanthropy. They may schedule annual retreats. A family I'm working with does an annual retreat every year. There's 35 shareholders, large company, large family, but they get together every year. They have been doing it for many, many years, and they do segments around education on the business or education on how to be a good shareholder. It could be varying different things. And a family council is kind of the nucleus of the larger family. It's not the entire family. We tend to call that the family assembly, which might be the whole family. And a council is a subset of that family assembly. So maybe 3, 4, 5 people of the entire family. And their job is to get together. Could be quarterly, could be monthly, depends on how often, it depends. And they may get together and say, well, what's the purpose and mission of our family. Why need a family council? What problem are we trying to solve, or what opportunity are we trying to leverage in a family council? And then they come up with some different reasons, and they may come up with a purpose and a mission and a vision, and even a little bit of structure. What committees? Maybe there's an education committee or a philanthropy committee. Maybe there's a common vacation home that mom and dad have as a second home, and that's kind of where everybody tends to gather. So maybe there's a committee around managing that house, for example. I worked with a family that had a huge compound up in Canada, and the family council, one of the responsibilities was there was a committee that managed the family compound up in Canada. So it all depends. There may be a legacy committee. There may be a communication committee that puts out a newsletter to the greater family as to what's going on. And, Andrew got married, and Fred graduated from college, and Sandy's got a new job, right? Whatever it might be. That's a family council that really helps unify and keep the family together. Now on the business side, you've got a board, and it may be a family board, it may be a board of advisors, but let's go and actually go all the way and talk about a board of directors.
Yeah.
And in this third generation family, that's a sizable family. It's been around for 100 years. Maybe it's a $100 to $200 million company, who knows what. And it's in the manufacturing facility, it's in the manufacturing industry that could be around for a long, long time. And third generation is now in their late 20s, early 30s. They've worked somewhere else for a number of years, and now they're starting to come into the business. And it's time to start to form some governance, because the first generation is trying to retire. Second generation is really thinking about it because they're in their 50s and 60s, whatever it might be. Now, this board really becomes a very useful tool. It can be a useful tool. And the first question I always ask a client when they're thinking about a board is, what problem or what opportunity are you trying to solve with a board? So let's define the goal here. And because initially what everybody always does is they go to their mental Rolodex or their mental contact list, and they start thinking, geez, I play golf with this guy, he could be really useful. Or this woman I know from a board that I sit on that's a non-for-profit, she's very, very smart, she could be great. Maybe, but let's actually define what's the purpose of what the board is supposed to do in the first place. So once we define a purpose and a mission for the board and what opportunities it's trying to solve, so to speak, or address, now we know what kind of a team we want to put together, right? If we're a sports team, what are we trying to do? If we're trying to win a championship, well, who's on the team now and who are we missing to get to the championship? And so you got to look at what purpose we're trying to solve first. Then we start to look at what types of people might be a good fit. And I kind of look at it as a blank sheet. I don't want to think of an actual name. I want somebody with certain expertise. We're trying to expand overseas. So I want somebody who's got international marketing expertise or international logistics, or knows how to build a facility in China. Or we want to expand in the US, or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. So we start looking at what are the needs of the business, and we build out a matrix of talent of both cultural fit and expertise or fit. And then we start to say, okay, what are the priorities here? And now we've got this kind of a resume or whatever it might be, or profile of a person. Then we can start to toss around some names. You also want to build some structure. How often does the board meet? Is this a quarterly board? Do we meet for a half a day? Is it a full day? Who's going to chair the board? How many people are going to sit on the board? What's the board mix between family and independents? Do we want to stay as a family majority board? And let's assume it's 7 people. Do we want 4 family and 3 independents? Or do we want to shift and have it be more of an independent board? All these types of questions, and these are just a few, start to factor into what do we do and how do we build a board. But the fundamental question at the end of the day that you got to be able to answer is ownership willing to listen to other people? Are they willing to take the advice and direction from other people? Because if you don't want to hear it, don't waste your time. Don't build a board. You got to be able to listen to other people. That if you really want good people on a board, you got to hear what they're saying. And a fiduciary board of directors, they have voting, they make decisions. And so you got to be comfortable with an outside entity, a board, being able to make decisions on distributions, on approving a budget, on a strategic vision for the business. They're there for a reason. So you got to be willing to embrace that.
How do you help someone overcome that fear? You mentioned earlier this idea of losing, the thought of losing control of my business. What if someone else screws it up? And someone's it's in that headspace. How do you help them? How do you help them through that?
I think the number one piece I do, or any of us do, to help them overcome that fear is kind of ground them in the reality of what the board is going to do, right? Fear is often, it's the fear of the unknown. You don't necessarily know something, so you fear it. And that's normal. We all have that in life. So what I really try to do is kind of create a level view of what a board really is there to do and why it doesn't need to be feared. And again, as I said right in the beginning, is you have the ultimate control because you get to choose who sits on the board, from family members to non-family members. And if you're not happy with how the board is performing, or they're making decisions, or you just they're not clicking, you can change that. So the control always sits with you. The board isn't going to, the ultimate decision in a company is to sell, right? That is the ultimate decision. The board's not going to make that decision for you. Ownership retains that decision. They have the right. Board can't sit there and make the decision to sell. They may make small acquisitions, and you may create dollar thresholds as to who makes what decision, ownership or the board, and that's perfectly fine. You get to set the rules of the game. There are no rules that are pre-established when you look at governance in a family business. Each family gets to establish what I call the rules of the game, or what decisions each entity gets to make, ownership or the board or management. So the way I reduce fear is, let's have an open discussion about it, and let's see if we can get some alignment on what those expectations are across ownership, management, and the board.
And these people are contracted, correct?
Yeah, they're contracted, they're paid.
Yeah.
There's compensation, and there's there's different reports out there in terms of what you would pay a board of director, a board member. And they are, and often you put them in terms, 2-year, 3-year terms that are renewable, and you may create term limits that they can't serve more than 5 consecutive terms, or they may age out at a certain age. Yep, you get to create all those different parameters that kind of fit your family business.
And how do you? And the last questions on that piece is, how do you help someone understand, realize the ROI on the investment?
It's interesting. ROI in business can be determined a lot of different ways, right? There's financial factors that it's return on the investment, and usually it's in financial terms. To measure the ROI of a board, I suppose you could put some, but they're not. At the end of the day, the board is not the one that's driving sales. They're not driving profitability. They're not managing your expense line. That's management's job. The ROI in the board is to really understand, if we're going into a new market or we're expanding, how helpful was the board? Is the board helping the CEO be able to do his or her job more effectively? Are they providing the tools? Are they asking the right questions? Are they helping ownership? Is conflict, how do you manage ROI on conflict? You can't, it's arbitrary. It depends on the family. And so if a board comes in and all of a sudden manages a structure and a family and ownership, which may be in conflict with each other more effectively because they create that middle layer, and all of a sudden ownership can relax a little bit, knowing that they've got a good board in place and they're overseeing management to run the company, that can sometimes take down the tension of a family that's in business with each other. Well, what's the ROI on that? It can be very high, or some families may say, that's fine, no big deal. So ROI in a board is I find it's a little bit hard to measure that. I kind of like the sleep factor. What's the ROI?
Yeah.
You know, if you can sleep at night knowing that you've got a really good infrastructure in place that's managing your family's assets and business, that's a primary source of wealth creation, that's a pretty good ROI.
Yeah. And most business owners, they're focused on either increasing revenue, reducing expenses, or minimizing risk. And to me, the
Yep.
board kind of falls in that third category. It's lowering risk and perception of risk over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great point. Risk is
Yeah.
risk mitigation is big, and the board can be very, very helpful in mitigating that of
Yeah.
all sorts.
Especially, I think, and even in today's age, just think back in November when artificial intelligence has been around a while. We've had Google Home and Alexa and Siri, and people aren't aware that AI is already integrated into their lives.
Yep.
But I think the understanding of leveraging that, and with newer forms of artificial intelligence started late last fall, companies now are accelerating adoption, integration, and that's just an example, right, thereof of how quick things are changing and evolving, and in a world that's continually to accelerate the change that's happening. It's even, I think, it'd be more crucial that businesses get folks who are, depending on where you want to go and what you want to do, you build the right team around you. And there's so much, and I think it's so important why folks work with someone like yourself to customize this team, because the team's it's only as good as the members of the team, right? And the cool thing is there's a lot of amazing resources out there that can be leveraged, especially if you're going to allow them, as you said, a high level board member, someone who really can bring a lot to the table, is not going to want to participate if you're not listening to them. And they're just showing, even doesn't matter what you're going to pay them. If you're not listening to what they have to say,
Nope.
and because they're going to want to be part of something that's going to have, for their own sake, they want to be able to help contribute. And if you're not allowing them to,
Absolutely.
then forget it.
Right. Absolutely. And it's why I push when a family is starting to consider a board, I really push them on, are you ready for this? Kind of be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. And if you are ready, it can be amazing. But if you're not ready for it, that's okay too. Like, again, no judgment. It's every family is different. But you got to be ready for a board. It's a big change, and it can be a really healthy move, but you got to be ready for that change.
Yeah. Where can folks go to learn more about you? At the FBCG, can you give us?
Sure. So I'll give a little bit of a background. Family Business Consulting Group. We're getting close. Next year, we celebrate our 30th year together.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's amazing. It was started by a couple of wonderful guys, Craig Aronoff, John Ward, and it has evolved tremendously over the many, many years. We are headquartered in Chicago. There are 8 partners right now. It's growing, which is exciting. We've got about 30 consultants across North America. So we consult all over the world, but our base is kind of North America. We've got 3 or 4 up in Canada, and the rest spread across the US. The easiest way to learn about Family Business Consulting Group is go to www.thefbcg.com. You can find out more about me. You can find out more about the firm. And we are solely focused on helping family businesses, family enterprises grow and sustain across generations. And that's where you can really learn more about us.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great articles and resources there. Also, you guys do webinars and things like that. People can plug into educational forums as well. So
yeah, there's a ton of IP, whether it's webinars. We run educational sessions. In fact, later on this year, in September, I'm doing a 2 or 3 day workshop with a colleague of mine around family director essentials, how to be a good family board member. That's just one example, but there's many, many different education sessions, articles, whatever you need. It's a good place to go and check out some pretty great content.
cool. Well, Thank you for that. And do appreciate you taking out some time of your day here to share with us on the importance of governance and building continuity in family business. David, thank you so much. Really
Well, Chris,
appreciate it.
thank you. It was great to see you and spend time with you. You do a fabulous job with these podcasts. I hope people, there's a plethora of them out there, and people should watch them all. And I appreciate you having me on today. It was great to spend some time with you.
Thanks, man.